Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our expert talk on thoughts on free data with Next Museum I/O. Before we dive into the topic, let me say a couple of sentences to our project. My name is Alina Fuchte. I'm the project manager here at NRW-Forum Düsseldorf, and we initiated this project together with the Museum Ulm. And it's funded by the Federal Cultural Foundation in the Fonds Digital. And yeah, we are a platform for swarm curation and co-creation, and we have a few open calls online at the moment, so you can check this out on Next Museum I/O. And yeah, let me just hand over to you, Janina. You're the host of the evening, so let's go.
Hello everyone, my name is Janina Kempkins. I'm an art student from the Kunstakademie Düsseldorf, and I'm working for Alina for the NRW-Forum and nextmuseum.io, and I'm organizing this talk on Creative Commons, open data, and its possibilities and potential. And we have three parties this evening. The first one is M.Zeilinger, who is our academic backbone this evening. Then we have Gabby, G.Schulte-Lünzum and Flara from the Städel Museum, who are going to talk about their big project of the online how do you say it? Collection, yeah. Thank you. And then we have C.Dullaart, a Dutch artist who is going to talk about his perspectives on these topics. All right, let's start. So Martin is the first one to start. He's a senior lecturer of computer art and technology at Abertay University in Dundee, Scotland. And that's where he is right now as well. And he's a curator as well, and topics such as digital art, appropriation-based art, and theories of cultural and intellectual property. And he just published his book, AR Art as a Hyper-Object-like Portal to Global Warming in, I think, July, right? And yeah, he's also writing for different magazines, and I think he will explain himself furthermore.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation as well. All right, so if I am to be the academic backbone, then I better make sure I'm cross my T's and know what I'm talking about here. Yeah, I'm mainly currently, I guess, identifying myself as an academic because I do a lot of research around how contemporary artists and digital artists are using emerging technologies very often to kind of problematize ideas of ownership and originality and authorship. Maybe I'll use that focus that I have anyways, and that interest that I have to hopefully frame our conversation a little bit, maybe also raise some questions that we could come back to, or that that others might find stimulating as well. So anyways, I myself have been thinking about this stuff, free data, open data, for a really long time. I'm very passionate about open access concepts, about free culture more generally. And I started doing this work in the context of thinking about artistic practices of appropriation a lot. So concepts of reusing stuff, copying things, sampling or remixing, creating collages and so forth. And these practices have a really long history in art making. And throughout that history, constantly, all the time, they are really fundamentally at odds with traditional notions of what, of what an artwork is, does it have to be an original? Does it have to be unique, for example? They are at odds with ideas of what an artist is, one person, a genius. And also appropriation is generally at odds with what ownership might mean, in a traditional sense, where to own something means I have it and nobody else can have it. And appropriation art, over the decades has had really interesting ways of undermining those notions, or just testing their limits, really. So my background is in the humanities, but in doing this kind of research and this kind of work in contemporary art, I ended up actually working a lot in contexts that involve law and legal theory and philosophies of intellectual property and ownership. And the reason for that really is that at the end of the day, whatever ideas and ideals we subscribe to, at the end of the day, very often it's legal frameworks that will end up determining what the real status of an art object is, or a digital artifact is, or whether interaction or transaction between an artist and another artist is legitimate or not. So very oftentimes we resort to law to think about this. And there too, I think that appropriation art has done really amazing things in kind of showing the cracks and the shortcomings and the limits of the legal frameworks that we have available to think about, the freedom of artworks and ideas to move and circulate and be shared and be reproduced. So one really interesting way to approach these problems is through various kinds of alternative licensing models. And probably we'll hear quite a bit more about that today, because Creative Commons is a really important one. And I know that at the Städel-Museum that is the framework that is being used. So Creative Commons is a really important alternative licensing module that I like to think of it as kind of a layer that is put on top of regular copyright and intellectual property rights. And that added layer can empower artists, but also users like all of us, to have a bit more say in what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do, or what's possible or not possible in our interactions with art objects. And so personally, what I ended up doing a lot is giving advice to artists on what their rights are, or what licensing modules they might want to use in order to have more control or better understanding of what happens with their work. However, and this is where I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. However, I would have to say that even if we use something like a Creative Commons licensing module, I think all of that still generally is happening within the constraints of a quite conventional, and in my mind also quite conservative, notion of what ownership is and what intellectual property is. And those notions are determined in our present times by essentially the capitalist economies and political systems that we inhabit. So since also today I think we want to be talking a little bit about maybe the anti-capitalist potential of open data or free data, if that's what we want to do, then it might be useful also to think a little bit more about not just alternative licensing models, but maybe also about the underlying concept of the commons itself, where a lot of this thinking comes from. And so the commons, as you might know, is this kind of philosophical construct of a zone, or whatever you might want to call it, that is populated with things and nobody owns them. And it's a great, beautiful idea, a great vision. And unfortunately, it has been kind of co-opted in capitalist systems as just kind of a source for things that you can appropriate and turn into private property. So the way the commons very often functions now is as this zone out of which we can take things and turn them into things that belong to us, and then they are therefore no longer part of the commons. So a radical thinking about maybe the anti-capitalist potential of free data, in my mind, requires that we really also think a bit about the commons and what happened to it and how we could revive it and how we could really insist that the commons exist. And so in my thinking and writing about this right now, I'm really interested in emerging technologies such as blockchain-based, decentralized computational systems that might help us do that to some extent. And the way this might work is, well, essentially, I'm interested in developing maybe something like a post-humanist commons, a commons that does not exist on the assumption that human agents are, the supreme rulers and owners of the planet and are entitled to turn everything into property, but maybe a post-humanist commons that is also populated by other types of agencies that might be non-human. They might be animals, they might be plant-based, but they might also be algorithmic maybe. And that could have their own entitlements, or maybe even more interestingly, that could somehow resist the propertization that us humans tend to be very good at. So one of the questions I would want to throw out there is, what could a post-humanist commons look like? What kind of artifacts could be in such a commons? And how might they actually resist becoming property and becoming subject to the ownership claims of humans, of authors, of art collectors, of museum collections even. So, vis-a-vis that traditional idea of the commons as a source out of which we can grab things, a post-humanist commons might be a context in which ownability, if I can call it that, just doesn't really work in the first place. And so I could give some examples. Maybe we'll come back to that later on. I don't want to take too much time right now, but I could give some examples, for example, from context of crypto art, as it is now sometimes called, or blockchain art, where artists are working to create digital art objects that have behaviors that are kind of self-enforcing through algorithmic elements, smart contracts specifically. And with that ability, these art objects might resist becoming someone's property, or they might require that every time somebody buys an artwork, it also has to be passed on again within a certain time frame or something like that. So we could have somehow empowered art objects that could participate in economies of sharing and reusing and giving and circulating by somehow insisting themselves that their ideal mode of being is not as property, but as something that resists ownership or resists property. And maybe I'll leave it at that, because I'm not sure how long I've rambled on now. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. And I have more ideas and questions for the other panelists as well. So I'll say something again later on.
All right. Thank you, Martin. There were a lot of questions. We will get to that later, I think. I think we just go straight on with everyone and then have a big discussion at the end. I think that makes the most sense. But interrupt me if you think something else. So next on, we have Gabby Schulte-Lünzum and Flara, who both worked on the digital collection of Städelmuseum, as I already said. And Ulrike was studying art history, I think, before she moved to informatics. And Gabby is a, oh my God,
I'm from the capital. I'm a
Yeah,
business economist and an art historian.
Yes,
Both.
I didn't translate it to English. That's why there was an error in my head right now. But thank you. So both of them worked with over 22,000 works and made them available online. And yeah, we're excited to hear about that big project of yours.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, and thank you, Martin, for all your thoughts about art and properties and so on. And we are at the State Museum dealing with properties that represents 700 years of art history. And our first task was in 2013 when we started to construct an online collection. The first step was to watch all the different pieces of art. We have got different objects, and we have got different media in these objects, and we have got, of course, different properties. And you can imagine that it was really hard to find all the data for all the objects. And finally, we tried to establish a system where we can put all the data into each of the objects, and finally we can share it with people who are not able to go to the museum, who are perhaps interested in art, and who give people back a part of their cultural heritage, to be somehow democratic, to get free access. And therefore we decided to generate also the possibility to download the public domain images. And Ulrike will, I think, a little bit give an insight into our history of how to deal with a public domain, how to deal with Creative Commons, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's noteworthy, I think, that in 2019, when we began with the digital collection, and or when we began thinking about opening our collection and free access with the digital collection, we were under entirely different copyright laws in Germany at that point. So at that point, we had like 70 years copyright laws, 70 the time span from copyrighted works to the public domain is 70 or was 70 years after the death of the artist. So we are entirely under different restrictions with the things we can do, because we cannot dictate the copyright laws in Germany, of course, and we have to abide by them. So at that point, we started thinking about how can we make this accessible. Works in the public domain at that point were still under photographers' rights, which are 50 years after the death of the photographer or the person who digitized the artwork, which was quite difficult to overcome, we have to say, because we had to contractually manifest the opportunity for us to use these images. So Gabby is mainly responsible for the photo shootings these days, and we really have to ensure that all the photographs we take are free for us to use. So we have to we had to alter contracts with our photographers. So that was difficult. Then in, I think, late 2019, at that point, we decided, in late 2018, sorry, we decided that we wanted to make the artworks available. So we decided for a Creative Commons license, CC by SA at that point. because we wanted to have a free license where artists could use them. But of course, as a museum, as you might imagine, we have an interest in being named as the source of the artwork or as the source of the source image. And we have an interest in protecting the rights of the image in the long run. So the share alike clause was important for us at that point. At the same time, we wanted to use the really big images. We wanted to use the best images we had available, because we really think that free access and yeah, giving back the agency over the artworks to the people who actually own the cultural heritage is very, very important. So yeah, as Gabby said, we have a download button and a download layer where at that point you could download images under CC by SA license. Then in 2019, the European Court of Justice decided that they wanted to accommodate the digital single market in Europe and changed the copyright laws again, or gave out a directive that was to be implemented in country's law by 2 years, which then happened last year, mid last year. The German law changed, and from that point on, all the artworks that are in the public domain in the first place have to be, all the reproductions of these artworks have to be in the public domain as well. So this is something we wanted to abide by, of course. And so we changed our policies and we changed our opportunities of the artworks in the digital collection. We made them available without licenses, although we still have hope that people name us as the source of the images, because it's important to us still not only to be the big institution behind the artwork or something, but if an image is altered and changed and downsized, it's important to find where you can get the big source image if you want to use it. That's our main thing with that.
Or the original reference.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the point where we are right now. We have images freely available without license. This is only for 2-dimensional artworks, of course. 3-dimensional artworks are under different restrictions because there's staging and lighting involved in the digitization of these artworks. But yeah, we are at the point at this moment at 24,000 artworks that we can provide freely without license. And then maybe just a quick jaunt through the digital collection. Of course, I don't know if you know our digital collection. It's sammlung.städelmuseum.de, and we have an English version of that as well, of course. And here's an example for an artwork that is in the public domain. We have a download button right here. We have a download layer where you can read again what public domain means, what you can do with it, and what under which restrictions it is. None. And then we have a link to the public domain license, of course. Not license, of course. And we have a download option here for you as well. This, of course, is in stark contrast to artworks that are still protected by copyrights, because we, of course, cannot provide artworks that are still under copyright restrictions without getting into legal battles ourselves. So although we make the image and we own the rights to the image, when artworks are not in the public domain, we have no real opportunity or no option to freely offer them. So this is maybe something that we can discuss later, is we are very bound by this, of course, because we cannot give them to the public. And this is, of course, contrasted in Germany by copyright agencies like the VG Bildkunst Bonn. I think most of the countries have agencies like that represent artists and that also do good things for artists. They have artist insurances and stuff, which the proceeds go to partly. and which is a nice part, but solely spoken from the perspective of the institution, this of course to us is really restrictive, because not only do we have to pay big fees, really big fees each year for each use, for each like and share button, for each time we post it online, for each time we use it in an educational context and stuff. So this is really for us, unfortunately, something we really are not happy with at this point. But yeah, so we cannot offer these artworks to you. So we still have a download button because we haven't really designed a different button, but you can order an image here via our image agency, which then helps you with the copyright restrictions that are on this artwork. But yeah, that's the point where we are right now. So I think for us, it's really a thing of the stark contrast between stuff that is freely available, that we want to bring to the people, that we want people to use, that we want people to have fun with, to really understand that it's their cultural heritage, and the other part where we have no real opportunity to work with it. So yeah, I think that's for this part. Maybe in the discussion we will go more in depth into that.
Thank you. There was one direct question for you two. Marina Bauernfeind asked, how intensive do people use Städel's free data offer? Maybe that's like a quick question you could.
Yeah, I think we have the free data. The download button is used very, very often. We have quite nice numbers for that. And maybe a short addendum, we also tried to provide the data freely. We have an API where you can use the data, where you can get the data to all the free artworks under CC0, because we have some texts and stuff, but it's free CC0. So we also try to make that available for people.
Thank
I don't
you.
know, Gabby, do you want to go in detail with the
No.
numbers? Okay,
perfect. We're just in time, I think.
Yeah.
All right, thank you too. Yeah, so last but not least, here is C.Dullaart, who is a Dutch artist, conceptual artist, media artist, internet artist, and a curator as well. And he used to study in Rietveld Academy and also in the Rijksacademie. And yeah, I think he's interested in the internet and a lot of its crazy phenomena.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for offering me some space in between these wonderful speakers. Of course, I always have imposter syndrome. So, but I would like to say I'm very happy to hear that there's a positive results for also actually my compliments to the system, even if there's copyrights issues, that you provide an access to the image anyway. And I think that's actually a beautiful gesture, even if that trajectory is a complicated one, but that you actually provide it. My own personal experience in for example, working with Europeana, I think Europeana, that system was that I wanted to use the API, but then nobody had used the API before, although it'd been out there for a long time. And then I needed to, in the end, use their test API key. Just in the case of because we're building all these systems and we are thinking about all these considerations, that sometimes at least I get caught in thinking about the system so far ahead that I wonder if the use actually catches up. And therefore, I think it's very actually, yeah, again, the compliment, I think it's quite interesting to provide the access or show the route that it would take to get to the image and clear it officially. So I think that's a wonderful addition also even to this conversation. Myself as an artist, I started in the trajectory slightly more radical, where I was just, as a video artist, I was taping everything. And then after a while, I personally felt as if everything that just came on my screen would potentially belong to me, and I had the right to appropriate it, let's say. talking about the appropriation much more. And I think specifically if we talk about like collages and the external referent that is used in collages and the external referent that Picasso and Braque used, considering the Figaro and the newspaper, I think it becomes interesting in this time where the external referent becomes something dynamic. So it becomes something that is potentially alterable by the viewer. So it's not something that is purely static and designed by the author, and the responsibility is not purely just with the author, but these things with the interaction become much more dynamic. And I think as an artist, this became very interesting, that these kind of dynamics of like what becomes, let's say, what becomes a property to everyone and what becomes kind of like a cultural domain, and when would you actually need to resist the kind of idea that piece of culture belongs to someone, and that it could be prohibited from distribution. And so in that sense, for example, I was always interested in tracking a provenance and thinking of like, you know, many artworks are a response to another artwork, and would you be able to set up a chain, and that's a linkage, let's say, where you could track the attributions, and I think, or the provenance or the ownership, or and of course, like this is what happened within Creative Commons. But personally, I was always slightly allergic to trying to capture the my work, at least within a Creative Commons thing and license. And this is also, but this is maybe well, culture, like let's say the culture where I came from was much more like I guess a punk attitude, where it would be almost like shameful to put your work inside that kind of container, to prevent a kind of ultimate distribution of it. And therefore, for example, if my work is now memed, and if it would be under a share alike system where people would have to then mention me all the time, to me, that's worth way less than actually if the work is distributed without me. I bump into it in the world, in the wilds, let's say, online. And then maybe once in a while, somebody knows the work and has the heart to actually in the comments says like, hey, it's actually this artist's work. And I think to me, this is such a beautiful thing that like a work is distributed in that fashion, that I almost feel like it would be, for me personally, but I'm saying like, this is not a method in which we can politically speak, but I still, as an artist, kind of like embrace that method where I don't want to be capturing my work inside the Tupperware container of the Creative Commons. So in that sense, there is, of course, the Creative Commons Zero, in saying like that would be the direct donation, let's say, towards like a kind of just do with it what you want, but like the closest to like public domain. And in that sense, it would be interesting. But then still, to me, it's like partaking inside in the system. Although, of course, like it's a better option, because if you actually don't define it, the standard rules start to apply. So like the standard. So for example, with recently with a lot of the NFT market and crypto sales of work, there was the resale clause became kind of a talking point, where artworks, if they would be resold, then the artist could get like a percentage of that resale price. But this is all still based on an honor system. This is still based on an honor system that somebody buys the work through a platform that honors that agreement in that part of the contract. But it also actually, if I wouldn't do that, and if I wouldn't have that contract within European law, there would be the droit de suite. There would already be that kind of within the legal framework that would already exist. And this is something interesting also, like then, you know, how do artists actually know the default commitment they are entering in when they're publishing work? Do they understand the default, like, for example, that do they understand that then the work would be prohibited to be freely used for that if somebody would act upon it? Do they understand the inherent kind of contribution within that system, and that it might stifle the distribution of not only their work but other work, and therefore they're implicitly allowing that system to well, they're using that system. So this is also kind of strange for me. It's still a kind of internal struggle where I would think like, do you actually then publish on a Creative Commons Zero? Do you write a statement about it? Do you create your own, like the copy left, or do you create your own kind of artistic response to it? And until now, I always feel like my strongest message would be that if somebody copies the work that is maybe an internal, or like I try to reach out to them personally if there's something, if I think the accreditation would be important. But until now, I always thought that it's also practically the case that whenever somebody actually took some of my IP or somebody did something with it, it would be way too, for me as an artist, it would be way too much to, as in way too intense to actually enact in the legal framework, to actually start a legal case and to actually start to do all these things. And while at the same time, of course, like I'm working with work that I think should belong to everyone. So for example, and I won't show it now because I think it's good to stay in the conversation, but I once found the very first photograph ever photoshopped. And to me, I had a theory that that image should belong to everyone and that shouldn't just stay with the original owner. And I think it should be distributed. And I tried to find a way in which to distribute it, in which I could lay my, let's say, authorship next to that distribution of that image. But I think if I'm doing that at the same time, and I'm, let's say, arguing that certain images should be, let's say, almost like as a civil disobedience, should be distributed, and almost like I'm thinking of the Copy Me church, the Pirate Bay religious, well, the church that the Pirate Bay started, in which they could actually consider the copying and distribution of information as a religious act. If I consider myself to look at that and then to try and enforce kind of like a legal framework, but then to hire lawyers and to see if I can get into an emotional case. I've never been in the moment where I thought like that would be maybe it my point is what it protects is the people that are already within an enormous, that's my feeling at least, and maybe that's part of the discussion too, like doesn't it also like protect kind of the estates, the enormous values? Doesn't this framework also kind of enable the discourse around the kind of like let's say, just like for example the public domain 70 years thing was decided in European or in American law because of the Disney heritage. Isn't this also that we're thinking about these rights also just because of large, let's say, large corporations and large estates and enormous amounts of wealth that actually aren't considering like the importance of distribution of culture and the access to information? Yeah. That's it, I think.
All right, thank you. So yes, first of all, thanks to all of you. Is there anything someone wants to say to each other right now? Or questions?
Yeah, I think I want to say something to Constant. I find it very interesting, your perspective, and maybe a bit inspirational even. But the real thing is that my struggle with this is, or I'm trying to differentiate my personal beliefs from my obligation in this institution, and my restrictions that I'm given by law. So I think it's difficult for me to try to find a way to fight against these restrictions when we have even agencies that say, even if an artist, maybe a bit more classical artist, I think I believe, but I'm not sure, but I think it's Rothko that really wants to have his work distributed, because it's interesting for him, the marketing value, the value of his name, of his market price and stuff. He thinks it's of value to have his work distributed freely. But we have agencies that work against that, that say, we want a part of the pricing because we want to put it into artist insurances and stuff, and it's art in Germany, and so it's these restrictions. And I think that's something that I personally, not as my function in this institution, but I personally find very, very I don't know, restrictive, because if a free artist wants to share his work or their work, they're free to, in my personal opinion. But of course, how do you work against this framework? How do you distribute your art freely without risking that anybody puts restrictions on them based on copyright law in different countries?
So in my understanding, it would be, I mean, but also like, of course, like I have a part of the imposter syndrome is, of course, that I have the wild card of the artist, and I can say all these kind of like abundant opinions, and I don't have to negotiate within the academic or institutional realm. But as far as I understood it, is that work has to actively be created. Like, for example, since Creative Commons Zero exists, like you would have to actively publish within that, because then the Creative Commons might be respected. But then, of course, you would still have, for example, now instances where automatically, for example, certain algorithms or make mistakes, or like music is already blocked. Even, you know, your own music might be taken, your video might be blocked because you used your own music, which was then automatically registered somewhere. You didn't have the capacity to actually register the music there with that kind of licensing structure. So it becomes kind of, it does become a very bureaucratic, even as the contributor that you might say it, and even if you, I mean, even Van Gogh already wanted to have his work distributed, right? Like they already said he could do without the locomotive, but he loved the printing press, and like the anyway, like as in like he wanted. Anyway, there's like, but under which conditions do you now, like as an artist, as a starting artist now, do you make these considerations? Do you actively, how much information do you need to know to actually tread this landscape, to actually publish your work, to avoid such a case, for example? Or even if would you be able to reconsider, for example, if a work is published under this thing, would you then reconsider at a later point in time? Or it becomes part of and anyway, and like, it becomes for me even more confusing when there's, for example, all this crypto stuff doesn't deal with licensing at all. It just becomes a kind of strange reference to a work, and it doesn't actually become a license to distribute or to show the work. Yeah, so for me as an artist or as a creator, it's kind of beyond my ethical considerations. It becomes kind of a challenging task to see how you would then deal with this publishing, beyond the fact that I maybe found this loophole that I decided not to care too much about it. But then, yeah, your example of Rothko, yeah, how do you solve that issue? It's true.
Yeah, and we actually do have artists that, especially in video and audio art, I think Gabby has tried to really angle that point, but it's really almost impossible to move these people to the point where they want to show their artworks online because of fears. And yeah, maybe Gabby, you want to elaborate on that?
No, just I have a question to consent myself. Sorry.
Okay.
but it's true what Uli talked about. We have got some pieces of video art pieces, and these are not visible on or on display on our online collection so far, because the artists refuse to put them online, or refused that we put them online. So he wants to hide his videos. He wants to keep it for himself. I don't know what the purpose is. And these are really two sides of the same thing. Some people really want to communicate, want to distribute their art, and some people want to hide it and want to keep it for themselves, just to, I don't know, just to sell it better, or to have the control. I don't know what it is. But I have got a question concerning your art. Do you physically exhibit pieces of your art still? Mm-hmm. But you also have NFTs, or okay, both. And you sell them. You sell
yes.
both.
Yes.
Okay. And why do you sell them?
Why do I sell them?
Hmm?
Because it funds my practice and pays my rent.
Okay. But so people don't pay for the artwork; they pay for your idea somehow, or
no. I mean, there's physical artworks, and there's like NFTs, and there's like the actual the whole distribution chain still works. But there's also it could be that the work itself manifests in a different layer, or manifests within a different type of distribution. So it could also be. I see it much more as like if people buy a reference to a crop from a movie or something. And they would maybe see the movie. Maybe the movie is like available for everyone, but you want to be actively affiliated with that culture. And if you want to be actively affiliated as a supporter of that culture, you start to wear the T-shirt, or you start to buy the prop, and you start to actively engage with it. And then if that actually becomes another layer of the artwork, and there's like, then to me that makes the work interesting at these different layers of distribution. But yeah, so. Just as an anecdote, maybe I was once in a presentation with Vojna, the performance group that was with Russia playing up, but like they painted they were doing a performance group, like let's say against Putin. They were doing a lot of things, anti-Putin things. And they were in a festival, and they saw a presentation of a person who cut their videos into trailers, so into just like kind of showing what the video would be like, but not showing the entire thing. And the funny thing was that they were, of course, like as activists showing the entire piece, and they saw it as like, as artists also, they saw that the entire idea needed to be distributed as much as possible, and that they were paid to perform at this festival, so that kind of inherently paid them to show the work. And there was like a kind of almost like an unsurpassable canyon between understanding that somebody would just show a trailer and make the work only accessible to the person buying the video, or seeing it in a different institution, then a person like feeling the urgency to show that work to everyone. So of course, like there's different intent, and like, or people see something as an idea that needs to be communicated, or see something as an object, let's say, or as like an object for a transaction. But to me, it's still, if we're talking about like art historical facts, after a while, don't we get to a point where it surpasses this idea of the potential object for resale? And don't we actually get to argue that it's like a part of culture, and that like a reference to it should be able to exist, especially if you talk about like the image of a painting, for example, or a reproduction of something. Yeah.
Maybe another question to Martin. Sorry, do you want to jump in there?
I was going to, but I'll do it later. No worries.
Okay. I think, in my personal belief, I really hope, at least, that in the next few years, a few of these fears and restrictions fall with evolving blockchain technology. And I hope that the fear of unrestricted distribution is something that holds back a lot of artists. That might be, I hope that might fall. This argument might fall with the blockchain. Do you see that, or am I just delusional in this?
I really also don't know. I mean, I share that hope to some extent, but I also feel that this is a technology that already has a lot of very sinister applications as well, not only utopian and amazing ones. And the way I see it so far is that it really is, I mean, one of the to me, most problematic contributions, if we even want to call it that, to the digital art worlds that the blockchain so far has made, is that it facilitates this fantasy of kind of a scarcity that can be reinvented now, you know, and supposedly attached to digital artifacts that otherwise are maybe super easy to circulate and distribute and copy and share. So in some ways, the technology actually ends up reinstituting quite restrictive ideas of what property and ownership is. Of course, it's also true that, like with NFTs, as Constance was saying, it really only is a referent to a digital file or artifact. So in principle, you could have ownership claims associated with an NFT-enabled artwork, but still have the image, let's say, or the sound file circulate freely forever and far and wide. So I couldn't really tell. I don't know. The question that I was going to ask, and based on something that Constance was saying, and maybe bringing it back to your Creative Commons license use for your collection, the question I was going to ask has to do with the, I don't know, the enforceability of the whole system. And Constance was mentioning that as well, right? Like when push comes to shove, and there is a problem, and there is a legal complaint, what happens? And also, who can afford to deal with it? Right? And so this is definitely, I completely agree with you, Constance, there, that the system, even if on the face of it, has the ambition to make, you know, legal remedies or whatever we want to call them more easily accessible, it still is a very high thresholds in terms of the difficulty of trusting the system. Like you need a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of knowledge, I think, to, as an artist, trust that you can protect your interests using Creative Commons licenses. Because what that system cannot save you from is all the headache and complications that start like an avalanche if you actually want to enforce these licenses. So I'm wondering if in your experience, like, have you had to deal with the actual enforcement of restrictions, or insisting on the openness of the licenses and enforcing that? That also can be a difficult thing to enforce.
Yeah, so I think, which is common sense, is that we don't have an army of people in a basement somewhere that search the internet for artworks. That's not real. So of course, we're not seeing everything that is published, and we don't we don't necessarily look for every single use of our objects. What the Creative Commons license afforded us, that we lost with the public domain enforcement of copyright law, is that with the copyright with the CC license, there's a part that says the image cannot use in a way that evokes that we are happy with the use, that we go along with the use. So this is something that we lost, of course. Now you can use it and say the Städel Museum says we are the best company in the world, which is not necessarily bad or good, but it's something that we can now no longer regulate. And I think one of the really worst things anybody could think of is something that happened here in Frankfurt. I think 2015 it was. The NPD, a right-wing party here in Germany, used an artwork from the Darmstädter Landesmuseum to enforce their claims on the right side of history or whatever. So that is something that now, when you have a CC license that says this, that you can legally go after. Which is now something that could just happen to us. This is, of course, the worst case anybody could imagine, and that happens like 1 in a trillion times or something. Yeah, of course. So we didn't really enforce that in this manner. We had a few cases where people used images on the internet where they didn't use the share alike part. So we sent a friendly reminder that share alike means that images are to be under the same license, no matter how you change it or no matter how you use it, which of course for artists is not really something they always want. They might want to use it and change it and then put it under a different copyright or a different license. But yeah, that was something that we had to deal with, but we didn't go to legal means for that. We always solved that.
Can I provide one crypto remark on the on the NFT sales thing? As in 2014, we with the Scribe.io here in Berlin, we did the register works also of mine in the Bitcoin blockchain. That was like precursors, like proto NFTs, basically, like providing transactions and principally providing a certificate of authentication by hashing the file. So the file could be anywhere, but we would have a unique hash that would be the reference to the file. And it would deal with licensing. So how many licenses would you provide and what licenses this person or their owner obtain? And I think this was quite interesting, but the company didn't survive, and then also didn't survive until this boom started. So a lot of this was lost. And of course, the infrastructure, I think now is, I think even the remark in that you're adding this layer of transaction and this artificial scarcity to things that might not have needed that, and therefore it stifles kind of the distribution of a part of culture. I think it goes even worse, where if it's tied up in an infrastructure that might not survive and might not be the dominant trust network, it might just get snowed under and get lost completely. So that means that, like, do we now start to archive all these things, archive like IPFS nodes that won't be supported in the future? Do we look at like kind of these NFTs that are maybe sold, but do we back it up as almost as a service for people that are buying it, just so we can save the cultural reference, like the cultural importance of it, because it might get lost if the technology doesn't work anymore. So it's because in the end, of course, like a lot of these things work because of a trust system. Like in the end, Christie's had to call my gallery and like get an email to verify that the work was true and that the gallery owner, and like they went through these kind of archaic steps for me believing in cryptography and believing in like how to secure my emails in very kind of like absurd steps, like to verify that a work was mine. So in that sense, like these kind of trust networks will stay alive, and like it doesn't mean that all these companies and all these initiatives will stay alive and all the works will be there. And I think a lot of stuff will be published into 2 years into the future, and then we have to wonder if they survive. So in the end, I think only the dominant network, if it provides that trust system, will survive. And I'm wondering even, and then the method of survival that they use, I'm wondering if that would be, I would think that it would be contrary to the idea of solving the licensing situation. I think it will probably make more money by obscuring it and by making it more difficult. But I have a slightly dark outlook on the future.
I think I share that outlook as well. Yeah, but that's a really interesting point you make about the also potential obsolescence of these infrastructures. And there's, you know, who's going to know in 10 years time if you really were an OG, whatever, if the nodes are down and there is no way to verify the hashes and whatnot. So, or
somebody lost your Creative Commons licensing remark. You know, maybe that wasn't archived correctly.
I mean,
that might also be the problem of physical art, pieces of art also. I'm thinking of Roth's chocolate pieces, and they might disappear in some years, and they even change. And perhaps it's part of the art.
Yeah, definitely. If it can be ephemeral, of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
it can be, of course. Yeah.
That's just really.
Martin talked about empowered art objects in the beginning as well, and maybe an empowered art object is also being able to just fuck off and go and leave this world. But we still have one more questions from the chat, which was to Gabby and Ulrike, to maybe tell us a little bit more about the internal discussion at the beginning of the project.
About the licensing, or about the
I think the whole
project. Okay. Yeah, I think we lost Gabby somewhere. Okay. I think the first discussions were had that we wanted to extend or reach beyond the museum's walls, so to speak, and we wanted to reach more people. We wanted to have an alternative. We wanted to create alternative access for people that are not in the city, that cannot come to us, that cannot see the artworks. I think the more important part of this is that we don't try to substitute the experience with the artwork in the museum. It's a different experience. It's a different access. It's different. It has different restrictions. We can provide different information. It's an entirely different experience, so to speak. So yeah, I think we wanted to provide as much information as we could, because we have a very very broad spectrum of people that are interested in our artworks. We have artworks from all kinds of times and all kinds of materials, so we are not really specialized. So we wanted to extend that to the digital realm, basically, and wanted to provide as much as we can.
And I think the question also asked into the beginning of our process and internal process, and it was difficult because some of the curators think it was somehow yeah, it's a concurrence to them, but it isn't. And what I told first is the main point is to collect the data also, not only to show the art piece or the piece of art. We have to collect the data, and we have to provide the people with the data. And that is, we collected the information around the piece of art. And that was the difficulty, that everybody was really keen on it. And I think it was too abstract in the beginning. Now it's clear, they know why we reuse text, why we collect all the metadata around the piece of art, and I think it is accepted now that we are doing it, and that it's really a lot of work to collect the data and to provide it on the online collection. But meanwhile, I think we are accepted, but in the beginning it was really difficult to find the acceptance.
Thank you. I think we do have to come to an end at some point. We had a lot of interesting questions this evening about mimification of work, post-humanist commons, the question of who is supported with the whole question of licensing, about all the struggles with law and how it decides contributions in the end sometimes. And yeah, I'm thankful for all of you, and I think there's a lot of thinking soup, as I said in the email this morning. Yeah, thank you very much. If there's any question in the chat anymore, now is the time. But I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Very interesting meeting all of you.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the sun.
Bye-bye.
Still some, yeah.
Ciao.
Yeah, bye.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.